It's a pleasure to be here. I lived in the district during the late 70s, and so it's kind of nice to be back. I became a SABR guy in the mid-50s. Now, it took Bob David's 15 more years to actually invent SABR, but I was ready. I began by reading baseball cards and memorizing the back of baseball cards. Not by trying to memorize them. I was incapable of forgetting anything I ever read on the back of a baseball card. To this day, Bruce and I were chatting about this the last couple of days. Things that I read on the back of a baseball card will pop up into my head that hadn't been there forever. Bob Friend's middle name is Bartness. Why would I remember that? I just can't not remember it. But as a kid, my mother bought me Ethan Allen's All-Star Baseball Game. Did anyone ever play that? With the spinners. And then I graduated to APBA. Anybody play APBA? Well, if you play Ethan Allen All-Star Baseball and you play APBA, you have an appreciation for what sabermetrics is today. So I learned when I was 10, 12, 13 years old, things that Bill James was writing about 30 years later, when you start to realize that, geez, a guy that draws a lot of walks is going to score a lot of runs for you. And this was a time when baseball wasn't really thinking of on-base percentage, for example. So anyway, I was ready for SABR. So I go to a Midwestern parochial school, and I have to laugh when I heard Jane talk about the school that Babe Ruth went to. When Notre Dame was founded, it was like that also. One person described it as Botany Bay for Catholic boys. And I had to look up what Botany Bay was, but it was a penal institution. There were a lot of Catholic schools that were founded in those days to provide discipline to wayward children. In Cap Anson's biography, he said the reason he was sent to Notre Dame was that he was kind of mischievous, and they thought that perhaps the priests and brothers could straighten him out. So anyway, I'm waiting for SABR to come along. I majored in journalism at Notre Dame, and I was offered an interview to work in the sports publicity department. And the director of the sports publicity department is doing this interview with me, and he's kind of a crotchety guy, and I don't think I'm doing that well in the interview. And I see some baseball memorabilia in the office, and I said, yeah, I'm a baseball guy. And he sticks his finger at me and said, who are the 5 people that Carl Hubble fanned in the 1934 All-Star game? I said, Ruth, Garrett, Fox, Simmons, Cronin. He said, can you start Monday? So baseball has been very, very good to me in some of those aspects. So I was a high school English teacher and baseball coach, and had a lot of fun doing that. But eventually I found myself in the district. I was hired to work at a police think tank in Washington, D.C. So the day I get there into D.C. in the late 76, early 77, my sporting news arrives. You might remember the sporting news. They actually used to cover baseball. And my sporting news arrives, and there's a column by Bill Madden. And in Bill Madden's column, he talks about SABR. And he said it was founded by L. Robert Davids from Washington, D.C. In those days, they had a thing called a telephone that plugged into the wall. And they had phone directories. So I looked, I know, it's hard to imagine. So I looked in the phone directory, and there's Bob Davids, or L. Robert Davids, in the phone book, so I dialed the number. And if any of you ever knew Yvonne, she answers the phone, and I tell her, you know, I'm new in the area, and the SABR looks like something I've been waiting for all my life. I read it in the Bill Madden column, and she said, come over tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. So I show up at Bob's house at 9 o'clock the next morning, and a small all-star team of SABR giants are there, okay? Bob McConnell and Al Kermish and Tom Hufford and Bill Dean and Conrad Horn and me. And why are we there? If you go back far enough in SABR, Bob would do the newsletter on a Saturday, 6 times a year. And he would bring in a group of guys, and we would all have designated roles. So you would fold the newsletter, you would stuff the newsletter, you would seal the envelope, and then Bob would put the last step, he would put the label on, and then they had a special mail service so that it could be mailed cheaply. So you've got these all-star guys from SABR, and everybody's throwing trivia questions at each other, and it was like the greatest time a person could possibly have. And I'm sitting at the right hand of Bob Davids, one of the finest men the world has ever known. It was a wonderful experience. I was telling Bruce a little anecdote. There was a SABR member, pretty famous SABR member, and I won't embarrass him by mentioning Dr. Harold Seymour, but he insisted on being called doctor. And Bob Davids had a doctorate, nobody ever knew, he didn't tell anybody. But so Bob just happens to mention that. And Conrad Horn, if anybody ever knew him, a real feisty guy. And so he didn't like that. And then Bob mentions that, I left out something. About halfway through our folding, Yvonne would come in and we would break for refreshments. And Yvonne would bring us these Flintstone jelly glasses with grape juice, and we all got one cookie. So we would eat our one cookie and drink our grape juice and have this little break. So anyway, Bob Davids then said that Dr. Harold Seymour called him and was irate that he opened his newsletter 2 months ago and there were cookie crumbs in the envelope. So Conrad Horn says, "Give me his envelope." He took a cookie and crushed it. And then he wet the envelope and put cookie crumbs all along the envelope, then sealed the envelope and scotch taped it. It was like this thick. It would look like a letter bomb. But anyway, you've got these wonderful SABR people, and in those days, SABR was like 300 members. And by the way, I got a member a buddy of mine that I worked with to join, and today John came up and introduced himself to me and told me that he joined SABR because my buddy got him to join SABR. So that's like 3 degrees of separation, I guess. But one of the things I really loved about SABR in those days was small organization, and heavy percentage then were researchers. As the years went on, a smaller percentage were researchers. So these were guys that really dug into SABR stuff. And so everybody's saying to me, what are you researching on? So I said, writing a book on Notre Dame baseball. Now Jane said that she spent, I think, 8 or 9 years writing the Babe Ruth book. I spent 39 years writing my book. Got it published, but it took me 39 years. I started it in 1965. I wrote Herb Simons. Anybody remember him? He was the executive editor of Baseball Digest, and that was my second Bible that I read religiously. And I wrote him a letter, and I told him that I had a 2,500-word article on Notre Dame men who played in the major leagues. I was a college student. And he wrote back, I gave him a little teaser, he wrote back that if I could get the letter, the 2,500 words to him in 10 days or so, he would pay me $50. Well, at that time, Notre Dame was paying me $1 an hour as a student. So $50 was a lot of money. So I had to then sit down and write the 2,500-word article that I said that I had. And I wrote it, he published it. So that was 1965. And over the years, I kept collecting material, and in 2004, my modest book on Notre Dame men who played in the major leagues came out. Just lots of little anecdotes come to mind. You asked about Christy Walsh. There's a famous photo of Christy Walsh, I'm sure Jane has seen it, He was quite a promoter, and he was also a ghostwriter. And he wrote a lot of things for Newt Rockne. And there's a famous photo of Christy Walsh, Newt Rockne, Howard Jones, Pop Warner, and a couple of baseball guys, Ruth and Garrick. And Ruth is in a Notre Dame uniform, and Garrick is in a Southern Cal uniform. So if you ever encounter that photo, it's kind of an interesting photo. I have it in my house, which Larry and Ronnie and Pete have seen since they have stayed at my house, which is much more modest than Bruce Brown's house, but I tried to be hospitable anyway. So over the years, again, Bob asked me to be his vice president of SABR, his last vice president, and then he asked me to succeed him as president. So I became president of SABR at a terrific time that was sort of alluded to by FX Flynn. The time that I became president of SABR, Bill James went off like a skyrocket. So, and he coined the term sabermetrics. And lots of people joined SABR because of the great publicity that we're getting, not just from what regular SABR guys were doing, but from what Bill James did. So it was a great time then to be involved with SABR. One of the things I observed over the years is how different people treated us SABR guys. If you're an old Baltimore guy, you can help me out on a name. Who was the famous Baltimore sports writer, baseball writer for many, many years, the 50s and 60s?
John Stedman.
Stedman interviewed me right after I was elected president of SABR. And, you know, they're always looking for a hook. So I'm telling them all these great things about SABR, everything that I can think of, great things. And then in the course of this long interview, I said, by the way, my wife calls it the Baseball Nut Society. Well, guess what the headline was? So all these other things went by the wayside. So some people, I think, thought of us as baseball nuts in a good way, but maybe a quirky kind of way. On the other hand, some people, I won't mention by name Walt Masterson, some people in baseball maybe didn't like us at all. The very first SABR regional that I went to that Bob held, the two major league speakers were Willie Miranda, one of Ronnie's buddies, and Walt Masterson. So we've got a break period, and everybody's talking to Willie, and nobody's talking to Walt over there. So I decided I'll be a nice guy and go over and talk to Walt. And he's snarling when I come over. And he said, you guys think you know everything about baseball, don't you? I said, well, he said, I'll give you a question you don't know the answer to. He said, what position on a baseball team has the strongest throwing arm? Well, I played a little baseball. I was a high school baseball coach, so I'm thinking it over, and I said, catcher. No. Shortstop. No. Third base. See what I'm telling you? You guys don't. Right field. No, never mind. I'll tell you. It's second base. All right, come on, Walt. It ain't second base. But he would represent someone the opposite of Larry and Ronnie that you're going to hear from a little later, who did not have a whole lot of respect for baseball nuts. But on the other hand, on the dais with me at the Providence Convention, where I was first elected president of SABR, I'm sitting next to Lou Gorman, who was the general manager of the Red Sox. And I grew up in the Boston area, so Red Sox fan. Felt I knew a little bit about the team. But again, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of Lou Gorman. But we had a nice little conversation going. And this is an example of someone giving some respect. I got the nerve up to say, you know, Mr. Gorman, there's a player on your team that I really, he stops me. I know you're going to say. I said, no, it's a guy I I know what you're going to say. Trust me, he can't play. I haven't even got there yet. He said, no, I know what you're going to say. I said, Reed Nichols. He said, yep, he can't play. Trust me. Now, this is a guy talking about one of his own players to a stranger, but he respected me enough to know that it wasn't going to be leaked to the newspaper the next day. So then I said, I'm feeling really good that he's talking this way. I said, you got another guy I want to mention to you. You just picked up Rick Gagnon. I said, I really like Rick Gagnon. I think that was a great pickup. He said, real good hitter. Couldn't throw out my grandmother.